Thank you. Thank you very much, Mitchell, for your so far useful technical help you have provided to our colloquia. Thank you from my heart and from Violeta. Dear all, thanks from me and Violeta, everyone who participates in this first colloquium in this spring term. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you, and also Violeta, you can.
Hello, thank you also, Ioannis, for our beginning.
Thank you. Tonight we have two interesting talks on science and arts, and it is an honor to welcome the president of the European Academy of Science and Arts, Professor Klaus Mainzer, and the vice president, Professor Birgit Harris, who always are so supportive in this activity of our academy. I would like to ask the president, Professor Mainzer, to say a few words.
Okay, thank you. Welcome again to this first meeting of this very successful series, Science Meets Arts. It's the first meeting in this summer semester. And thanks again to the organizers. This evening, there are two lectures on mathematics, music, and literature. And at the first glance, these disciplines use different languages. Mathematics and music uses formal notations of notes and formula. Literature uses linguistic expressions of the natural languages. For laymen, at least, the formal notations of mathematics and music are sometimes strange. Charlie Chaplin, the great artist of the last century, could not compose with notes, but he had wonderful melodies in his mind, which he used in his famous movies. So what I want to say, that notes, formula, and linguistic terms are only tools, skills, and crafts which we must learn to handle. But in the end, they have in common to express human ideas, concepts, imagination, and even, at least in the case of music and literature, and even feeling and emotions. In short, human creativity. I think we all are very eager to learn more about these fascinating approaches to human creativity this evening. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your nice words. And I would like to ask Birgit Harris, the Vice President. Please, Birgit, if you could introduce this spring, or summer, if you want to say, as some call it, colloquium. Thank you.
Just a few words, Ioannis and Violeta. My winter semester just ended on this day, and so it's a big pleasure. Thank you for the invitation to this summer semester. So it's for me, it's very astonishing, but I'm glad to join this colloquium, and I'm expecting for the talks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brigitte. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as I said, tonight we have two distinguished scholars, Emmanuel Amiot and Varujan Vosganian, for half an hour presentations on science meets arts, or if you would like, arts meets science. Let us start with the first one, which is Emmanuel Amiot, of some fascinating developments in maths and music. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Emmanuel Amiot. He is a professor in the High Chair of Mathematics and Music, Université de Perpignan, France, in the Laboratory of Mathematics and Physics. He was associate professor in special mathematics in the Center for Preparation in Mathematics, École Normale Supérieure, in Rabat in Morocco. His research refers to the mathematics, to topics in music theory, in music analysis, in music cognition, and his research interests go around theorists, composers, listeners, and their conceptualization of the tonal and rhythmic spaces and structures. Emmanuel Amiot has developed and published novel projects. For example, I have found some in the internet, developing software for dancing tango in Cobas, entropy of Fourier coefficients of periodic musical objects, strange symmetries, geometry and topology in music, music through Fourier space. A few words I would like to say for the non-specialist in mathematics. What is a Fourier transform, or FT? Is a mathematical transform that decomposes functions which depend on space or time into functions depending on spatial or temporal frequencies. For example, the expression of a musical chord in terms of the volumes and frequencies of its constituent notes. The term Fourier transform FT refers to both the frequency domain representation and the mathematical operation that associates the frequency domain representation to a function of space and time. Professor Amiot is a leading figure in this topic, and I wish to quote a fragment from one of his papers. Indeed, psychoacoustic experiments on the perception of silency and its evil twin, low saliency, including nullity of a coefficient, should be enhanced and furthered, since Fourier qualities seem to mirror exactly musical features processed by the human brain. Dear Emmanuel, the online platform is yours.
Thank you very much. I will use the keynote presentation for this. I'm very grateful for the invitation to talk here and for the very engaging presentation. You really did look me up and my works on the internet. I'm deeply flattered. So I will not mention tonight Fourier transforms, which is a bit of a technical use of mathematics for unraveling musical mysteries, which is of course something quite important, but it comes as no surprise that one uses mathematics for understanding the world, as I will mention a couple of times in this talk. I will try quite the reverse to show how mathematical in itself music can be, though maybe it's not something we can perceive in our conscience. It's very much something that happens somewhere deep in the brain, like the Fourier transforms, maybe, as you had just mentioned. And I wish to demolish a popular belief, which is that the mathematics are quite elementary. Elementary is an adjective used by mathematicians for something that they understand quite easily. But this is something which is very important to set right, because I have seen a number of promising students who were dissuaded to continue and further their studies to PhD level in mathematics and music, because their directors, PhD directors, told them there was no future in that it was not serious mathematics and things like that. Quite the reverse, and I will try to defend the fact that this is misconception with a couple of examples. I'm in a privileged position to know that there is very interesting and difficult mathematics, cutting-edge research actually used in music, because I'm happy to be a co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Mathematics and Music, and this is the journal for our scientific society, which has colloquiums every 2 years throughout the world. So it's really serious stuff, not kindergarten play. So now for some very simple music that actually I sometimes use with kinder, with kids in kindergarten, but the mathematics behind are quite impressive, as I hope you will agree. So this is a kind of musical score without notes. It's just a drums score. I'll let you hear it. Okay, maybe not too many times because it's getting quite repetitive. You can see that's a very simple structure because we are repeating on several different notes in several different voices the same rhythmic pattern, which is 4 times in 4 voices. You have the exact same tempo, and the third voice, the one in the middle, the lowest one, is slower, twice slower, what we call an augmentation in music, something that all musicians like Bach and others were doing all the time. So that's not a novel idea at all. But the history behind this rhythm is that Tom Johnson, an American composer living in Paris, tried to do this kind of canon. Yeah. You can see it's a canon, and it's a tiling also, because you have, for each beat, you have exactly 1 note played in one of the several voices. Never 0 notes, never more than 1. So this is not so easy to do in a general way. As I will mention, it's a fantastic and very difficult mathematical problem, but of course it's quite easy to find solutions, small solutions by hands, or many solutions by computer search. And what happened when Johnson did this, precisely in 2001, was that there was a feature, a surprising feature of all solutions. The smallest is this one, which we have heard there, and all other solutions have a number of notes, which is a multiple of 15. That is to say 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, and so on and so forth. Now, this is, for a mathematician, that's something that can prevent you from sleeping for days or months. I dare say that many people would not be very interested in this mystery, but for a mathematician, it's just an itch that you cannot resist. You have to understand why. And this is something that came as a complete surprise. I'm just giving some written indications of the solution here, but never fear, I won't go into the details. This involves quotient spaces, which are finite fields with a characteristic number equal to 2. And to make a long story short, the number 15 arises because there is a mathematical structure, which is written here, which has 16 elements. And 16 is 15 plus 1. That's the point that everybody can understand, I'm sure. The one element which is set apart is 0. All other elements are invertibles, where that's technical points. So this is Galois theory, something developed in the 19th century and still a subject of active studies. And there is a quite interesting theorem which explains this mystery of the rhythmic tilings by Tom Johnson. So, striking first example. Actually, on the other way around, not to explain music by mathematics, but the reverse, I have been working in tiling theory, starting from musical questions. Actually, the theory of rhythmic canons, which are a musical way to consider tilings, was developed in the 1990 or so by Dan Tudor-Vuza. Well, he published at this date, but he had worked like 10 years alone on this. It's an impressive achievement. And it's mirrored in the musical domain researches that had been done in the west of Europe, in Germany, England, and America also, quite independently, and he found the results which had been the conquest of a team of a dozen of the best mathematicians in the whole world, actually. And the idea is quite simple. If you listen to this phenomenon of a tiling, you have heard 4 voices of 4 notes. I'm sure you did. Okay, I clapped on 2 successive voices, and I think everybody will agree with the human mind that this is a 4-note voice. But actually, mathematically speaking, you can consider a voice which is made of the repetition of several times the same voice. And this is a huge difference because it enables, if you consider a reduction to the smallest possible thing, you can use some recursive proofs, mathematical techniques, which allow to prove interesting phenomena. For instance, there is a very hard conjecture, which is still open, dating back to 74. And with these musical ideas taken from Vusa and others, it was possible to find an infinite number of cases where the conjecture is true. So it's partially proved. The last development happened just last year about this one. So it may be mentioned also that trying and to find all possible rhythmic canons of this kind without augmentations in the tempo is still a very difficult problem, again involving Galois theory, though not necessarily on complicated objects like finite fields. Now, back a century. I guess everybody in the audience will have recognized the music piece here. Well, I'll let you have the movie a second time. I hope you have noticed that each time you move, there's a single note changing. Can be the one on the left, can be the one on the top, can be the one on the right, depends. It cycles actually, but there's only one note move on 3-note chords. So that's what we call in music a parsimonious move. It has been developed, as I will tell, quite recently. And you can see also, if you can read the music here on this part of the screen, this phenomenon of changing just one note each time. Also, the chords involved are classical chords, what we call perfect triads, minor and major triads, indicating minor or major tonalities. And there are 24 of them. And this procedure of moving one note each time, one definite note in each chord, enables to cycle through all 24 minor and major chords. And this is actually a mathematical theorem that I will now state. But you may not know that the man who found that was a huge giant in mathematics. He was obviously very well known for his musical achievement. But as you will see, he made something in mathematics that would deserve to be called Beethoven's theorem. So this is actually the sequence of chords on the musical score. If you cannot read music, don't worry, you can see it on the graph on the left-hand picture. You can see there that you have a graph made of all notes. I indicated only a number of them. That's E flat, C, and A flat, making up the chord, which is here of A flat major. I will put in an arrow moving to the next chord here on both pictures. Can you see them? perhaps you have to move the thumbnails of the videos of everybody if you want to have a look
Yes,
at the
Emmanuel, sorry, something is covering our right part of your screens. There is a...
Yes, I think it's something in Zoom which is making room for the thumbnails of all people in the audience. I am sorry, I cannot control this.
Okay, go on. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'll move to the next arrow. That one you will see, I'm sure. Okay, so this is moving from the F minor chord, which is this triangle in the graph here, and it's moving again to a major chord, which is the next triangle. And all those triangles are major or minor triads. And this is connecting vertices with edges in a way that is called a graph, since a publication by Leonhard Euler in the 18th century, a good century before Beethoven's composition. And actually, it is little known, but it is very well known that Euler invented graph theory. I'm sure everybody knows that. But generally, one thinks of the graph of the bridges in Königsberg, and how is it possible to move each one time through each bridge. But bridges are edges, and the triads here are vertices. So it's a different problem, actually, and very difficult one to find a cycle which moves through all objects once and only once. And this problem was first stated more than a century after Euler by Hamilton, an Irish mathematician who invented the linear algebra, matrices, and things like that, and also the notion of Hamiltonian cycle, which is precisely that, cycling through all points, all objects, going through each one exactly once. And it's, if you know this categorization, one of the most possible problems in the world, what we call a NP problem, a non-polynomial time problem. So there's nothing harder than that. All those problems are in a way equivalent, meaning that you know when you get across one that it will be quite difficult. And it only became possible to solve by computer Hamiltonian cycle search by computer in recent years. But Beethoven found the first solution ever of this mathematical problem in 1920 or so. And this was only noticed a century and a half afterwards by Richard Korn, who made a theory of cycles on this graph on the left, which is called the tone nets, and which is an object of study and also teaching, because it's a nice way to visualize the movements between chords in the classical music, still nowadays. So you can see that really Beethoven did the pioneer work on a graph theory problem. This problem is, of course, for the mathematician, what are such cycles in this structure of minor and major chords, the tone nets? How many such cycles are there? Can we list them? And it was done quite recently, 12 years ago, in the Yale meeting of the society. And two Italians did precisely that with the computer, of course, not by hand, and found 262 cycles. So this is a good mathematical problem with the questions that originated in the 18th century and run through many geniuses, Beethoven, Euler, Hamilton, Richard Korn, he is giant in the field, and others who finally settled the problem with a definite answer. But the story goes on and on, because what you did for major and minor triads, you can do for more complicated chords, and other Italians are still searching. And still another Italian composed this song using one of those cycles, which was completely unknown before the question was asked and the list of solutions provided. The little earth indicates a chord. uppercase is a major chord. And now for a cycle. Moving just one note each time. Just one note changes in the harmony. I can explain the jump in the questions later on. End of the cycle, back to the original tonality. So now we have a wealth of possible movements cycling through all chords because Beethoven did it first. I'm not explaining the move on the right, which is a 4-dimensional graph made by the guy who devised the video. It's another story. So this was a very nice problem where we see that without knowing it, Beethoven asked a very deep question in graph theory, which could only be solved at the beginning of the 21st century. Now, for a jump much further in the past, I think you will recognize this photograph of a very famous guy, so famous that nobody is really sure he actually existed. So a little bit of Greek in passing, because I translated into modern Greek because we don't have a recording of the guy. But I will not do the conference that I have said I will not do about the usual stories of scales and temperaments and just intervals and so on, but I will have to mention them because of a very recent development, which is about the same time in 2010, leading to a major discovery in word theory. Not word theory in the sense of the next talk about literature, but words in the computational sense, if you like. So I will jump a few centuries ahead and mention also in the Pythagorean tradition, of course, the famous quote by Leibniz, who said, "Musica est exercitia arithmeticae." And he added, I don't have it in Latin, where the mind is unconscious of what it is doing, something like that, which is very interesting when you consider what our president just told before my talk. And indeed, you will see that there is such an interesting structure that just happens in the structure of notes and their intervals, that it's a bit like prime numbers occurring naturally in the sequence of all integers, and nobody really understands the way they do it. It's a kind of fact of nature and the way we understand it. So back to basics, there are two very simple intervals, which are the octave, which is a very natural identification throughout history and geography in any culture, any time in the world. You identify notes which are an octave apart, an octave being a ratio of frequencies equal to 2. And a man and a woman, for instance, will usually sing the same song, what they call the same thing, but it's actually with the ratio of frequencies from 1 to the double. And so this is physiological fact. The next simple interval has rationalization, which was done later than Pythagoras, for harmonics. Because when you have the third harmonic of a sound equal to the second of another sound, then they reinforce each other, which is pleasing to the ear. That's the theory of consonants done by Rameau and again Leonhard Euler in the 18th century. And you can find it in the encyclopedia. So this ratio is then, for this coincidence of harmonics, is equal to 3/2, which is very simple, a bit less simple than 2, but still. So is it possible to combine those intervals and cycle through a finite number of notes, for instance, making up a scale, which was the project of Pythagoras. And this was known to the ancient Greek to be impossible. And this is kindergarten mathematics, I will agree. And it was not at the time, 23 centuries ago, but it's something that everybody can understand nowadays, because if you have this equation here, it's the only equation that you will see in my talk. It leads to a clearly impossible equation where a power of 3 is equal to a power of 2. And of course, an odd number is never equal to an even number. So let's forget that it is impossible to do something with these intervals, and let's do it nonetheless. So if you iterate starting from some note, fixed note, these intervals of fifths and octaves still going upwards. I'm sorry, the names here have not changed. They're in French. So fa is for F, do is for C. Perhaps you're familiar also with this notation. And you can see that there are different intervals occurring. And the more towards the right one goes, the more notes get crowded together. It can be proved that the distance tends towards 0 when you move to the right on the infinite line. And this is a construction that is that of a Pythagorean scale. So it's very well known in the ancient theory. But I will show you what happened with the modern mind, and that led to a very fascinating discovery in mathematics. So let us encode the intervals between one note and the next one being the closest to the right. We begin with a fifth interval, then a fourth from C to F, then a second, major second from F to G, then again a fourth, again a second, then a new interval. So I'll give it a different label. From D to F, it's a minor third, and so on and so forth, and so fifth, and so third. Sorry for the pun. And you see something which appears, which is a word, because it's written with letters in a very naive sense. And this is something which is the object of word theory. Now, what Norman Carey, who is leading the CUNY University in New York, discovered in 2009 was that there is a wealth of palindromes. You have noticed this, CD, CC, DC. Next one, D, C, C, E, C, D, C, sorry, I cannot read it. It should be a bit on right, C, C, E, C, C. The next palindrome is actually the major scale. So this is traditional stuff in a way. But what he noticed with the aid of a computer, of course, was that when you continue to the right, you still have many, many palindromes. And what he proved was actually more than he had noticed. And in a technical but very precise sense, this word that he named after Plato is saturated in palindromes. It's infinitely rich in palindromes. Oh, sorry for the sound. Okay. So this is something which was published in a mathematics journal on the word theory, on discrete mathematics, and not in a music journal. So time to conclude, as my clock tells me. I think I've made my point that the mathematics of music are definitely on the non-trivial side. And as editor of the journal, I can tell you we reject every week people who still work on that delusion. And of course, we reject their papers. But of course, like any activity of the human mind, especially creative activities, mathematics are a good way to understand what happens. It works in physics, in biology, in chemistry, in sociology, economics, whatever you want, because as Galileo once said, mathematics is the way we can read into the world. So that
Ioannis, I suppose it
Yes.
happened something.
Something
There's a
happens.
tunnel.
Probably his battery is off. He has said that probably he will have some problems. So
He announced us. Maybe
Yeah.
it's better now because it's you look, it's a 6:45.
yes, of course. So,
So
I have, if he finds a way to communicate with us, that will be okay, probably in the discussion section. Otherwise, he was going to finish now, as far as I understand. Okay, Violeta, you can introduce our second presenter this evening.
yeah, I have the pleasure to introduce our second speaker. Varujan Vosganian was born to a family of Armenian ethnicity. He's a Romanian essayist, novelist, poet, politician, and economist. Vosganian was Romanian's Minister of Economy and Commerce and Minister of Economy. He is the President of the Union of Armenians in Romania and the Prime Vice President of the Union of Writers in Romania. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages. He studied commerce at the Bucharest Academy of Economy, studied also mathematics at the University of Bucharest and got his PhD. After participating in the Romanian Revolution in 1989, he has been a member of the Romanian Parliament since the first free elections in 1990. He was twice elected a member of the Chamber of Deputies and a senator on the list of the Union of Right Forces and on the list of the National Liberal Party. He was also the leader of Union of Right Forces, a right-wing liberal party. Since 2016, he has been a member of the Chamber of Deputies on the list of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, ALDE. Along with non-fiction works on economics, Vosghanyan has also published many essays and literary texts, such as a volume of poems, short stories, novels. Up to now, he has received numerous national and international prizes and awards of recognitions for his work, among others, prize for the best prose of the year, very many such years prose of the best prose, Niram Art Prize for Poetry Tristan Tzara in Madrid, Romanian Academy Award, Gold Medal for Culture by the government of Armenia, Ordine della Solidarietà Italiana, awarded by President Giorgio Napolitano of Republic of Italy, and so on. The international recognition. Oh yes, you know, Emmanuel, we interrupted also. It's such a pity, but we have also to continue. But it's not the finish of your communication with us. We shall come back to you with questions.
I was almost there, so it's okay.
We discovered this. So
Sorry,
anyway,
electrical problem.
We have to continue. The international recognition came with the Book of Whispers, translated in more than 20 languages and presented in different events in more than 40 countries from all the continents. The Book of Whispers became the book symbol against the crime of genocide. Varujan Vosganian, as an author, has achieved something unique in his Book of Whispers, the hard reality of the Armenian genocide, into an unforgettable document through the stories of those who managed to survive and descendants who refuse to forget. This is a novel. It's also more than that. He created at the same time a timeless work of art. I quote, "But this novel tells an even wider human story, evocative of all the great sufferings that afflicted the 20th century, world wars, concentration camps, common graves, statelessness, and others. This book belongs to all peoples whose voices have been lost, hailed for its documentary value and sensitive authenticity. Vosganian's work has been an international phenomenon." I would like to tell you that the whole family, his wife, Mihaela Vosganian, and his daughter, Armine, they are both wonderful artists. I would like to mention especially Mihaela. She is a wonderful composer. She's a good friend of mine also. And I would like to mention two of her works inspired by the poetry of her husband. Jesus with 1,000 Arms, Oratorio, and her trans-real opera for actor experimental group of soloists, orchestra, process sounds, video, and dance, Awaken Dreamer. Please, Varujan Vosganian, I would like to invite you now to come to us.
Thank you very much, Violeta, for this very kind presentation. And my presentation is linked to literature and history. And the title, Literature as a Treatise of History, is not a conclusion, but it's a question. And I will try to answer to the similarities and differences between literature and history, giving the opportunity to a pilgrimage in the world of literature. And now I will use PowerPoint because there are a lot of titles of books evoked, and I want to show you all. It's okay?
Yes, we can see it, yes.
So, thank you very much. So, history is a source of inspiration for literary works, and we can say that is no event in the history that is not reflected in the literary page. We can say that if because you evoke the mathematics, it's a bijective function between history and literature. But I can say that literature offers a more nuanced, complex, and more persistent perspective on historical events. First of all, there are different occasions when the history appeals to literary works to argue its conclusions. And I give you here two examples. The first one is very well known, the poem of Homer's Iliad, which contributed to the discovery of the capital of Priam, Troia. And of course, the Bible. My personal opinion that the Bible is very important as a source of faith because it has a very powerful lyrical sense. And the Bible was a source for the history of the last millennium before Jesus in the Middle East. So literature gives us a chance to know and feel history through its events and heroes. And I give here some examples how the literature could create for us the image of different historical periods. I gave here the title of Spartacus of Raffaello Giovagnoli, Quo Vadis, the very well description of the Christians on the 1st century after Jesus, the Cursed Kings, the series of the 6 volumes after the destruction of the Knights of the Temple, 2 books about the rebellion of Vendée, 93 of Hugo and Les Chouans de Honoré de Balzac, and of course, War and Peace of Tolstoy. But it's interesting that literature could imagine history. It's not only a reflection of the history, and I give here a very interesting example, the pharaoh of the Polish Boleslav Prus, who imagined a king, a pharaoh, Ramses the 13th, who didn't exist. But all the description of the Egypt is very interesting with the conflict between Pharaoh and the priests and the social classes. And of course, Proust tried to explain the little bit of situation of Poland end of the 19th century using the symbol of Egypt. In the same time, it's very interesting that literature could explain better than history what's happened in different periods of time. For example, if you want to know why the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, you can read only the novels of Kafka, The Good Soldier's Wake of Hašek, and The Man Without Qualities of Robert Musil. Or, if you want to understand the tragedy of the concentration camps and deportation during the Stalinist dictatorship, you can read Zhivago of Pasternak or the Gulag Archipelago of Solzhenitsyn, and Güzel Yahina, which is a young writer, very interesting, with Tatar origins, and she presented the 3 novels. 2 of them are mentioned here, Children on the Volga and Zuleha Opened Her Eyes. And of course, Herta Müller's Atomstrauchel, written with Oscar Pasteur, a poet who experienced the deportation, German deportation in the Soviet Union. I give here the example of the slavery with, of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. But at the same time, you see, we have in Europe the problem of the slavery of the gypsies. But unfortunately, this theme was neglected in literature. We have only some heroines of romantic dramas like Carmen of Prosper Mérimée, Zamfira of Pushkin's poem The Gypsies, or Esmeralda from Hunchback of Notre Dame written by Hugo, or eccentric characters like Melquiade, the character of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or even we have disguised such Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre of Charlotte Brontë. He's not a gypsy, but he used the disguise to present himself to his lover. Literature not only present events, but could refresh memories about some historical events less known. I give here 2 examples coming from Mario Vargas Llosa, one of them very well known, The War of the End of the World, who is a remembering of the revolt of the millenarian sect in Brazil, 19th century, end of 19th century, and The Dream of the Celt, which describes the crimes of the Belgians in the Congo during the beginning of the 20th century. Literature is not only a reflection of the history, but sometimes an alternative to history. And I present here a very interesting example, Conspiracy Against America of Philip Roth, which is a story of not how it was, but what if. It's in America when Franklin Delano Roosevelt lost elections and Charles Lindbergh became president of the United States and made an alliance with Adolf Hitler. And at the same time, it's very interesting, the short novel of Dino Buzzati, The Desert of the Tatars, which is following the Huntington's conflict of civilization, an image of what happens with the immigration, waiting for the immigration, and it's a very interesting premonition in that poem of Dino Buzzati. Literature adds something which history couldn't do it. The utopian vision is very interesting that in the very early times, the utopian vision was linked to the legality. Platon, Zenon, or Hesiod tries to explain us how humanity could be brilliant using a canon of laws. In the Middle Age and in the modern times, the utopia was rather bright. And I give here the example of Utopia of Morus, The City of the Son of Campanella, New Atlantis of Bacon, and the Brobdingnag Kingdom in the second book of Gulliver's Travels. In the 19th century, the utopic vision became more doubtful. There is a combination between utopia and dystopia, and the most significant example is the Erewhon and Back to Erewhon by Samuel Butler. You'll see that in the 20th century, the literature adds dystopic visions. The dystopia triumphed in literature. The 20th century is very much pessimistic. Exception maybe New Utopia of Wells. All the books imagining another world are pessimistic. You see here Huxley, Orwell, Karel Čapek with Salamander War, Bradbury, Gibson, Casey, and so on, The Plague of Camus. And you'll see that a part of them, for example, Fahrenheit 451, or The Plague of Camus, or the New Brave World of Huxley, they were very much presented during the pandemia. Literature and history offer different perspective on people and facts. You know, history speaks about the facts behind the people. Literature speaks about the people behind the facts. And you'll see that the great events are only a background in literature. And I give here some examples. Nothing new on the West of Eric Maria Remarque with the three soldiers acting. They are the characters, and the war is only background, or the farewell to arms, the forest of the hanged, the brilliant novel of our Romanian Liviu Rebreanu, Man's Hope of Malraux, which is his personal experience during the civil war in Spain, and of course Blechstromer, written by Günter Grass. One of the differences between history and literature is that history evokes great events, great history, but literature evokes a little history. I mean, what the ordinary people are living. I have here three examples. There are a lot more. Gavroche, the character in The Wall of Jean-Paul Sartre, convicted and killed during the Civil War, and advocate Atticus Finch, who in the period of the racism tried to put justice around Niger. Consequently, the characters of history and literature differ. Differ why? For example, history presents Napoleon. The literature presents Fabrizio del Dongo, the character of Stendhal following the war of Napoleon, but seeing all the disasters of the war. History speaks about Stalin, but literature speaks about the day in the life of Ivan Denisovich. And Ivan Denisovich is for us more pregnant in his human tragedy. And of course, I presented a well-known character, Scarlett O'Hara, who is a key to understand what's happened in the soul of the human ordinary people during the Civil War, when General Lee was one of the heroes. And because there is such a difference, history talks about winners. Literature spoke about losers. And it's very, for example, Belisarie was a famous hero of the history, but Belisarie, blind and beggar, is a character of art. We remember the brilliant picture of Louis David. Albert Camus summarized very well when he received the Nobel Prize. He said, "The writer, by definition, cannot put himself at the service of those who make history today. He serves those who endure the consequences. It is not the weapon of tyranny, but the silence of an unknown prisoner that brings the writer out of his loneliness." This is a famous speech in Stockholm. There are characters, the leaders or commanders of the history, but they are not presented with their glory, but with their weakness in literature. And I give here some examples. Maybe the most interesting is Marguerite Yourcenar, the memoirs of Hadrian. And of course, I evoke here the series of historical dramas of William Shakespeare, when the kings and the commanders are presented with all their weaknesses and controversial behavior. In history and literature, there are differences between the understanding of death and suffering. In history, suffering is a detail, often necessary, and death is statistic. In literature, suffering gets its name and death doesn't have zeros. For example, during the Holocaust, 6 million persons died, and during the Armenian genocide, 1.5 million. Figures followed by many zeros. But if you look at the image awareness about the genocide, you see that the understanding of the gravity and scale of the Holocaust is a cultural phenomenon, first of all, not a political or legal one. Despite the fact that the genocide was recognized by the General Assembly of United Nations, we understood the tragedy through culture. From cinema, for example, I gave his example of the Holocaust series, which opened opened the series of masterpieces about the Holocaust, Schindler's List, of course, and Pianist, directed by Polanski. There is a huge number of books speaking about the Holocaust. I give here the example of Levik, Imre Kertész, Elie Wiesel, Wiesenthal, Hitler Morris, and so on. And I mentioned, of course, because I'm an Armenian, the case of the Jewish Franz Werfel and his novel 40 Days of Musa Dag, facilitating the knowledge of the genocide against Armenians in 1915 and the resistance of Armenians on the Mount of Musa. Literature has the advantage of an ironic vision. The history is more serious. And I give here the example of Kurt Vonnegut's books, Slaughterhouse 5, telling the story of the Dresden RAF bombing, and a book of a young American, Jonathan Safran Foer, It's All Enlightenment, which relates the crime during the Second War. History concludes, literature doesn't have conclusion, because, you know, the literature don't want to convince. There is an emotion which is the main source of literature. Literature does not propose codes, moral codes. It's not an apology of good or ostracization of evil. Literature, because you mentioned the music, literature is like a not well-tempered instrument, doesn't have white or black flaps. And we see that, for example, Macbeth or Othello, positive or negative, Karenina, Emma Bovary, Thérèse d'Esquerroux, aroused the compassion or indignation. Meursault, the character of Camus in The Stranger, deserved to be sentenced to death. It's a reader who has to decide. And because the literature doesn't have only good and bad, it's not politically correct. Literature, because it's not politically correct, and the characters are not infallibles, and happy end is only an accident. You see, there are a lot of books banned in the history. I put here a long list of well-known books like the Cameron of Boccaccio, Canterbury Tales, Les Fleurs du Mal, Huckleberry Finn, Ulysses, books, the novels of Orwell, Pasternak, Henry Miller, and so on and so on. But it's very interesting that also, despite the fact that only the books were burned, banned, truncated, the authorities never won in front of the books. Mankind has written more than it can forget. So the victory belongs to the books in front of the authorities. The difference between history and the literature is that in history it matters what the characters do, not what they write. In literature it matters especially what they write. I give you the example of some controversial personalities who accepted different totalitarian ideologies like Annunzio, Sartre, Ducreux, La Rochelle, or Heidegger, but they are appreciated as writers. And Kazantzakis, for example, he was twice in the Soviet Union, but he didn't tell anything about the abuses and the cruelties of the Stalinists. And because, you know, there are not only characters like Kazantzakis or Sartre, we have a lot of figures in the history, involved in the history, but with few exceptions, all of them acted against autocracy, defending human rights, dignity, and freedom. I give you a lot of examples with Andrea Chenier killed during the French Revolution, Lermonto, Foscolo, Byron, Mickiewicz, Lamartine, Hugo, Osip Mandelstam, a part of them victims of the dictatorships. And the list is continuing here. It's interesting that the history is written on the third person, but literature could be written on the first person. It's not a difference between history and literature. You see here important correspondences which give a personal, unique image about the historical context. And maybe Hannah Arendt and Martin Heidegger could present to us all the spleen of the 20th century, or George Sand and Alfred de Musset of the 19th century, and so on and so on. And at the same time, we have memoirs and journals. And I mentioned especially here the diary of Anne Frank and that of Robert Scott, particularly moving. Journalism is another part of the contribution of the literature to history. Two examples, very, very moving. Grossman with the Hell of Treblinka, Vasily Grossman, was a correspondent of war during the Second War, and of course Svetlana Alexievich, winner of the Nobel Prize with War Has No Woman's Face, the experience of the women during the Second War, Zinc Boys, the experience of the Russian soldiers in Afghanistan, and the Chernobyl disaster. There are books that belong in the history and literature in the same time, so there is an interdisciplinarity. There are not very clear border between history and literature. We have here 4 examples, 2 of them, Mommsen and Churchill. They won the Nobel Prize with their historical books. And of course, this is an example provided by my experience as economist. I can teach economy using only literary books. And I have a case study here, The Rise and the Fall of the Bourgeoisie. The rise of the bourgeoisie could be presented with novels of Honoré de Balzac from Human Comedy, Dickens with The Great Expectation, David Copperfield, or William Thackeray with The Vanity Fair. The decline of the aristocracy, we have Il Gattopardo di Lampedusa and Forsyth Saga of Galsworthy, class conflicts, Zola with Germinal, and the decline of bourgeoisie with Buddenbrooks and Les Thibauts de Roger Martin Dugard. And I will finish now. You know, there is a very delicate difference between history and literature, because history evokes the past and literature evokes memory. Memory is the past assumed now, understand now. Memory belongs to the present, is a Weltanschauung of the present about the past. And literature provides a key by which the past become memory. And I give here 3 examples: Shafak, The Bastard of Istanbul, Antonio Lobo Antunes with a very nice novel with a beautiful title, Until Stones Become Lighter Than Water, and Sabato with Heroes and Tombs. And Sabato says, the present generates the past. And the last one, if time were a being, history would deal with its body and literature with its soul. What we have from the history, first of all, is the book. Empires collapsed, armies disintegrated, cities collapsed, of course, but books, from the tablets of Nineveh, the Egyptian papyri, the scrolls of the Dead Sea, incunabula of Middle Age, the Book of Gutenberg, and e-books from today remains. The literature, if we make a definition with both of them, literature is a history of states of consciousness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Varujan. It was such a incredible, brilliant, and concentrate. So fantastic. Thank you very much. We shall now begin the session of discussion. And please, Ioannis, could you begin with your part? Ioannis, are you there?
Please unmute.
Ioannis.
Okay.
So anyway, we are beginning with the...
Thank
Okay,
you.
Ioannis?
Yes, here I am. I would like to thank also Varujan Vosghanyan for this very brilliant and interesting and with wide spectrum of consideration, literature and history, comparison and relationship. And let us start with question time regarding the first speaker, which is Professor Emmanuel Amiot. Is there anyone who would like to ask anything to Professor Amiot? please raise your hand, or you use, this reaction here with a hand.
It is also possible to write in the chat, or you also
As
raise
well.
your hand for questions.
Herr Klaus has raised the hand, but
Yeah.
nobody sees it.
I must not start, but
Okay, let
Yes,
us
you
start.
should.
Yeah, I
someone
cannot see
else.
anybody else. I see only Klaus Meinzer. Please, Mr.
yeah,
President.
let me start. Very fascinating talk, both talks. As a president of an Academy of Science and Arts, I'm always interested in the interdisciplinary aspects, of course. And so I had a question to the first speaker and to the second one, but we can come back to that later on. Now, the first speaker concerning mathematics and music. I think that talk again underlines that mathematics, in the sense of the Pythagoreans, is an exact science. He mentioned it. The famous quadrivium, the former disciplines of mathematics with geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. And music was a part of the mathematical sciences, and in history it belongs for a long time to the faculty, to the mathematical faculty. Now, anyway. The mathematics as the theory in music, which we learn today, is more or less still on the background of antiquity. That means the mathematical understanding in antiquity. That was the understanding of a theory of proportions. Proportions in geometry, quantities of geometry, the proportions of the spheres in antique astronomy, and so on. But then he explained to us that nowadays there is in the background of music the modern mathematics, starting with Euler and his famous problem of Königsberg bridges. That was the beginning of topology, and Galois, of course, the beginning of modern algebra. And today, mathematics is a theory of structures, topological structures, algebraic structures, and so on. So my question concerns education of future composers, of musicians, and so on. I think, and I ask you, is that right? It would be necessary that the people nowadays are educated in this modern mathematical background in order to understand what is going on in music. Thank you.
An excellent point indeed. One difficulty is that many musicians are taught rather in the humanities than in the scientific way, I would say. It's a bit of an academic problem, but still a very real one. One possible solution is the use of computers, because you can pre-digest in a way the hard maths, the difficult part, and have it done by the computer or by the programmers anyway. And so you can use ready-made solutions which implement the mathematics in some user-friendly interface. That's what is done with computer programs like Open Music, which is developed in the ERCAM in Paris, for instance. I myself have been doing things on the theoretical side, and then the programmers implemented them in the software, so that musicians without any mathematical knowledge can use it all the same. One of the examples that I provided was the question of all Hamiltonian cycles in the tone nets. Oh my God, just telling this in one sentence is really difficult and complicated, because it's really a mathematical notion. But the point is that you can just take the paper by Albinini and Antononi and list the solutions in the end and just use them for your composition as you see fit. So, well, that's a very good starting question. I would like to mention also that this strong interaction between diverse aspects of mathematics in the music is also an opportunity for teaching mathematics, or perhaps finding a sense and interest in mathematics again for those who have lost it through music. And I have a busy month in March, for instance, going into schools and doing things about rhythmic canons for kids like 10, 12 years old, and hopefully giving them a sense of the interest of mathematical notions just by clapping their hands and doing rhythmic canons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for Professor Amiot. I think Peter Herman.
Peter Herman, yeah.
Peter Herman, yes.
Well, it is actually a question to both of the presenters. And in a way, I'm struggling since today with it, having read something in the morning about the Chinese language. And I can link to what you just said, Klaus Mainzer, mathematics is about structure. What we lose with it, or what we lost with it, is the idea of structuration as an ongoing process that always and permanently changes and defines its own conditions. So I'm wondering, and referring to another Chinese book, Cixin Liu, there is a scene where he says, my teacher had been teaching Western arts, but not Eastern arts. So there was a limit in what the scholars could do. And I'm wondering, as much as I appreciate this formalization, and with this, the possibility to make something understood, even by computers, I'm hesitating a little bit, wondering if there is not a specific loss of understanding if we pursue it in this way. And now I come to this book, what I originally mentioned, it's Ying Qiu, Kingdom of Characters. And there it says, actually, the alphabetic language is a Western invention that performs as an instrument of modernization, and modernization in terms of the Westernization. So I'm wondering, to which extent do we really understand something that is different, written in a different language? Now, this is, on the one hand, the Chinese, obviously referring to this, but as well, to which extent can we really understand Boccaccio or ancient Greek literature, Homer? Isn't there a limitation by the language we speak today that prohibits, to some extent, to understand ancient books or even medieval books, or wherever we draw the line? I don't know where we can draw the line or should draw the line, or if we should draw a line in general, or say, well, we understand it. We understand the words, we can translate it. It's really a question of, is there a limitation, a limit to translationality, if you want?
Professor Amiot.
Oh, very nice point indeed. I would certainly agree with you that in any given translation, we lose something. Translating from ancient French to modern French, or of course to ancient Chinese to modern English. I don't know exactly what you can preserve of the original meaning. And as of languages, I feel myself that I speak, well, I can only express ideas when I'm thinking in the language, not translating in my own mind. But one possible solution of the conundrum regarding the use of mathematics in music would be that we do not use the language of mathematics, but there is a capability in this science of creating its own new language. And for instance, I took care to present examples with very different kinds of mathematics. And there was a language of geometry for tilings and mosaics, for instance, just like a puzzle. And the word theory, Ioannis mentioned the Fourier transform and things like that. So actually, you can pick and choose or even create a new language where you will be more able to come close to a comprehensive translation. Or that's my experience anyway.
Thank you. Another question? Anyone before we move to the second presenter? Tassos?
Yes, if I may.
Question.
Professor Boudis.
I wonder for the first speaker, Dr. Emmanuel, there is a very interesting open problem in mathematics that has to do with the sequence of zeros of a famous function, the Riemann zeta function. We don't know if this sequence is quite dense in the beginning and then becomes quite rare, but we don't know if it ever ends. And what is exactly the law of this, which has no periodicity or obvious normality to it? I wonder if we look at it musically, will that reveal some kind of structure in this sequence of zeros?
This has been done actually. I don't have the reference in the head, but I'm sure you can Google it. Also, we have had, for instance, a paper by a Fields medalist in the Journal of Mathematics and Music, who used generalization of these zeta functions to create a kind of rhythm and choreography for dancers on the stage. So that was a creative application, not a mathematical solution.
Was there any conclusion, any suggestion from this?
Not so far, but well, I'm not a specialist of this domain of complex analysis, but from what I've read on the topic, it seems that some people consider it a promising alley for researching the Riemann hypothesis. So you're quite right in that. But we haven't solved it yet. I will confess I have tried, like many others, in vain.
Okay, thank you. Another one?
Thank you.
Look, there is in the chat question.
Yes, there is one, but I'm not sure if it is for the first or for the second or for both. So let us finish first for the first presenter, not to confuse both, and then we go to Varujan.
But Heda has a question for the Emmanuel.
For Emmanuel, okay.
Look,
you listed how composers discovered
Yes,
math problems.
I can read it.
Okay, did you see it? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yes, it happens that my examples were before the 20th century. Indeed, well, just to show off a bit, I try to span as many centuries as possible, but quite obviously you have extremely interesting topics in the more recent compositions, but maybe we may think we lack perspective, and perhaps dodecaphonism, for instance, will be completely forgotten in 50 years from now. I'm not sure, or it might be revived in other ways. And there are many interesting things to say about that, but well, it's just a personal choice. I agree there are more interesting questions because there was such a multiplicity of different approaches and changes in musical topics and ideas and methods of composition. That's true.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
You know, following, for example, the Darboux theorem of the continuity, it's impossible to cross between 2 points without following all the points. And my question is the following: how the different theorems could be useful using well-tempered or non-tempered instruments. So I mean, if you create music for white-tempered piano, for example, or for violin, maybe it's the same scheme, mathematical scheme, could be useful in both cases.
Oh, that would be a topic for I don't know a week-long workshop. Actually, I myself produced once a paper on the evaluation of temperaments, unequal temperaments especially, and so that we may devise an objective way of comparing them, looking for the Holy Grail, which is how did Johann Sebastian Bach tune his own harpsichord, because nobody knows that, though many people pretend they do. So, well, there are some questions in mathematics of music that have nothing to do with temperaments and which can be applied to unequal temperaments close to equal temperament without major consequences. And of course, if you go towards questions of temperaments, sometimes, well, it depends. For instance, the theorem by Norman Carey, which I mentioned as the last example, is the same for any irrational ratio between what you call the octave and what you call the fifth. So this is really a robust mathematical theorem. Some other features might depend on the degree of irrationality. For instance, for quadratic thirds, it's not irrational enough for the golden ratio, for instance. Well, I cannot give a universal answer. It depends, but there still remains many interesting research to be done on this question of temperaments. I myself, I'm trying to record this year the whole of Voltemperetus Clavier, because it's the 3 centuries birthday of the publication of it, and we use a temperament which was found by optimizing with partial derivatives, calculus, and so on, some desirable features of a temperament, and you can find it on YouTube. Bach played with a new temperament, which is very close to the one devised by Keller, if you know the bevy of theorists who tackled this particular problem.
Okay, now another one. I
Yes.
would like, yes.
Do we have time?
Yes.
Just a short question.
Okay,
for
yes.
Professor Emmanuel. Now you mentioned it again by this last answer, this series of fifths and octaves, and then you mentioned, if I remember correctly, about the Euler's theory of consonants from Encyclopedia. I hope I remember exactly.
Yes.
I would just like to hear your comment if you are familiar with the Helmholtz consonants theory. He did it, in fact, rationally. In his time, there was not technological support to check this in prax, but Plumpt and Levelt did it. I don't know exactly which year, and they did it on, I think, 220 people, 250 people were checking, and it was exactly what Helmholtz was saying, that there is no difference between any interval in a sense of consonants except for the unis and the small second, and the fifth and the fourth and the sixth, they are all here more or less equal. But if we speak about the simple tones on only one sinusoid, and it's very simple to prove this by mathematics. If you are familiar with this experiment that Plumpt and Levelt did, I would be very curious to hear your comment on it.
Well, the The difficulty, yes, I've studied with these questions of consonants. Indeed, in a colloquium in Berlin, I was privileged to use the resonators in copper devised by Helmholtz himself, still there in the institute. That was a momentous event. And well, the point is that this question of consonants are a bit of contradiction between the need to play with a finite number of notes and the mathematical impossibility of devising a scale which is made only of consonant intervals. Well, there is well, I'm interested in the topic, but it's very difficult to provide a specific comment, just to say that this is still a good motivation, even nowadays, for mathematical studies. For instance, something which is a bit simpler than the theorem on palindromes, which I mentioned in the end, was trying for consonants in systems devised with other intervals, not necessarily rational in the first place, but able to create more consonants. I could point out, I don't have the title, but you will find it easily. There's consonants in it. The book by William Cethares, Cethares, who is really the specialist of these questions. We worked a bit together, but only with equal temperaments.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other question? I suppose because the time is running out, we are running out of time. You can write straight to Professor Emmanuel Amiot. I'm sure he will reply to you. I would like to end the first presentation, saying also that as long as the numbers go on ad infinitum, I think music as well, based on numbers and ratios, will not have any end. Let us go to the second presenter. Any questions for Vosghanyan, for the second presenter, please?
Yeah, thank you, Ioannis. Very good commentary also. Thank you, Emmanuel. Wonderful. I would like now to ask Peter Hermann. He wanted also to ask Varujan Vosghanyan. Put a question. Yeah. Peter?
Well, it had been basically the same question I asked before. The possibility, the opportunity to translate something, or if we are limited in our understanding of the current language we use, that there is a limitation, as I quoted here or made aware from this book on the kingdom of characters. There it seems to be very obvious that it is a language of the Western Enlightenment, even of modernity or modernization. If we have a similar way that actually face the problem in history, that we are stuck and we cannot really translate from history. As I said, Boccaccio, to understand Boccaccio, one has to live with what they went through, question mark. Or can we, to which extent can we say, yes, still we understand?
The problem of translation is, of course, a very difficult one. Its difficulty is bigger when we discuss about poetry. For the poetry, translation is very delicate to be done, and I have to confess, for example, in Romanian, we have poets who are very difficult to be translated. I mean, nobody was able to translate them. This difficulty, fortunately, is lighter now, because now the poetry is more free and without inner rhythm, like let's say in 19th century. It's difficult to translate Verlaine, for example, with the same musicality, but it's easier to translate Allen Ginsberg. This is the first point. With respect to the relationship between ancient and modern languages, it is not very simple to express a conclusion. For example, Latin. The Latin is not only the translation, but it's the way to think. The way to think is different, and the syntactic rules are different. This is the reason why the translation is not only a translation from a vocabulary to another one. It's a translation from a style of life to another one. And I think we have to resume ourselves to what Baudelaire says, la nature est un temple où des vivants piliers laissent parfois sortir de confuses paroles. La nature est correspondance. So, the symbols. We have to
Varujan, something happened with your image.
Violeta, you have another question for Mr. Vosghanyan in the chat.
That what
I saw the question of Loredana. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we see you. We see you.
Yes, we can see you, Mr. Vosghanyan.
You hear me?
Now, yes.
Yes, very well. So I want to put an end with what I said. You know, because I discussed about symbol. You know, for example, the tragedies, the great tragedies of the world, they don't have mother tongue. And when you describe a tragedy, you describe in the same time all the tragedies. So if you go to the depth of the human perception, you can understand without a very exact translation. The problem is that we have to understand, to live sharing the symbols, not only the words. For example, if you look at Gioconda of Da Vinci, nobody knows that behind Gioconda is the source of water, there are some hills. They say only Mona Lisa. The same with the literature. The symbol is like Mona Lisa. The background behind are the words, the vocabulary, and so on.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, Varujan, there is a question of Loredana for Mr. Vosghanyan. A few words, please, on the pandemic as a case study in the relationship between facts and consciousness. What facts actually stand for different consciousness? Can you predict what will history retain of it, and on what basis?
The history, if I don't remember because I didn't live that time, from the Spanish flu, for example, we didn't have the rememberings about the tragedy. I read some novels, for example, in Ireland, dozens of thousands of people died. But you remember from the Spanish flu only some whole image. It will be the same with this pandemic. The only question, I think, is not about the details, but the main topic that humankind can't face the death and the fear like before. It's very difficult now to imagine how people during the Middle Age went in crusades, for example. I think we didn't learn to face the perils and death. And I think this will be the lesson. But the main problem is not what the future will remember about pandemic, but the consequences of the pandemic, because the democracy was in danger during the pandemic, and we don't know how the future of the humankind will be. Why I introduce the different alternatives? Because I told in my presentation the memory is not the same And if the democracy will survive and will be consolidated, we will have different memories. That in the case that the humankind will choose another alternative, neglecting the human rights and the right to everybody to assume his own destiny and the maîtrise his own body. So, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We can go on, actually, as Emmanuel said, we could have a workshop about both presentations. Violeta, you can go on. We may do a workshop, yes.
So I want to add something. The pandemic put in actuality some dystopic novels. For example, on the very beginning, during the emergency state, we remember Roy Bradbury with that man with white combinations and entering in the house of people. We, for example, have the remembering of a new brave world with citizens intramuros and extramuros with the green pass and so on and so on. And of course, the plug of Camus with that environment isolated.
Yeah. Okay, Violeta.
What would you like me to stop or to?
No, another question.
Oh, another question.
For you.
Please.
I only want to remind you that we have a nice paper in the Academy on a pandemic, which is even translated into Greek by one of the organizers of this nice meeting.
Thank you. I shall send it to Varujan Vosganian just for information. Yeah. Please, do you have also other questions and remarks?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Bounty.
I have an educational question. It was a very exciting talk about combination of history and literature, which indicates to me that this should be a way to teach history in schools. History can be taught in combination with literature. I think you gave us a lot of examples of that. So my question to you is there a book written about this? Have you heard of such a way of being able to teach history with literature in the high school?
No, I don't know if such experience was done. It's my personal experience. I'm a teacher in economy, and I practice the use of literature for my students with the Romanian economy and worldwide economy. But it could be for the future a very good proposal, because the literature has a capacity to convince and to create emotion, and could be for the students a way to make more attractive the curriculum.
Exactly. I may add to this very interesting question by Tassos Boudis that in the universities, Greek universities at least, but not only, in foreign universities, history departments, archaeology departments, the subjects of historical and archaeological subjects are taught also through ancient literature. Without ancient literature, I think a lot of the history would be, very faint.
Yes, yes, of course. This is the reason
we
I
have
gave
books, literature, that helps, interpreting and knowing the historical events.
Yes, of course. I gave the example of Bible or Homer, but we can give at the same time the Greek tragedies, Aeschyle, for example, the war between Persians and Greeks.
Exactly, historian, yes.
So,
literature, that is literature.
Yes, Plutarch and the others, yes, of course.
Okay.
The Caesar, the war in Gallia, of Caesar, of course.
Violeta.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, you open an incredible new space for one side regarding university programs, and on the other hand, we have the possibility to understand deeply what happens. And myself, because I wrote your book, who gave me an incredible emotion reaction, and it's for me, it's like an analysis you did for yourself, your way of thinking and your way of writing the book. That's why your book has such a strong effect and is a strong resonance all over the world. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I also would like to thank also Emmanuel. You know, I listened to the music of Emmanuel and the question of Hedda, who asked what happens with the music of our day. So Emmanuel himself, he composed. So I would suggest, Hedda, I can send you some information about Emmanuel, and not only. So thank you so much. I think we had a wonderful colloquium together, and we thank you so much. So, Ioannis.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to our next meeting, the second colloquium in this spring term. In 2 weeks' time, you will be informed. Thank you very much, all of you. Have a nice time and take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My heart.
Bye.